My name is Selassie. Before becoming a chef, I actually worked with the United Nations for many years, and I moved back to Ghana about 6 or so years ago, and I wanted to find ways to add value to what the local ingredients were, what grew locally. When we left Ghana and went to the United States, people used to always ask me, what do you people eat in Ghana? And I would always say, oh, there's plantain, there's cassava, I would list all the different ingredients. And when I came here, it literally was like jollof rice, fried rice, check rice, wache, everything was rice. And I started asking myself, why is there so much rice and why are we not using some of the other ingredients? So I decided that I was going to start using millet, and I became obsessed with millet. And I just started realizing that we need to create a supply and demand. And I think that this drink that we just had is a perfect way of adding value to something that is based with millet. But I also wanted to kind of maybe get us all excited and thinking about why we should use millet and why we should not be eating as much rice. I know culturally, for a lot of us in Ghana, from the olden days, you only ate rice for special occasions. And jollof rice is because it's a birthday or some kind of celebration. And if you think about all that hard work that has to go into cultivating this rice, it's easier to boil yam, actually, or something else, or grow yam. It doesn't have that much labor involved with it. So I started thinking more and more about millet. So I think in Ghana, it was about 2017. I think it was 1.6 billion US dollars is being spent on the importation of rice. So what would that look like if we'd spent that money in Ghana and gave that money to Ghanaians or use that money to improve roads or infrastructure? Where we would be today is in a much better place. First off, COVID, I think at the beginning of COVID, I said to myself, where are we going to get our rice from if Asia shuts down? The second thing is, what else is there to eat locally? Like, what are the value chains? What are the infrastructural requirements that we have in this country given COVID if the rest of the world is not able to send us food? So when we think about it, millet is one of the grains that we have, and it doesn't require a lot of fertilizer. In fact, it doesn't even need a very fertile soil, which means you lower your inputs. It also means that climate change, it's drought tolerant. So in the next 15, 20 years, it's also an exciting crop for us to do. There are a lot of nutritional value to it, which are actually higher than white rice. And I know in this group we've got people who are on the agriculture side, and I know we have people who are on the food side. So this is, I think, the perfect conversation to have, because I've been asking myself, how do we create almost a mini revolution around millet, whereby we've got chefs, cooks, caterers, people coming up with amazing ways to use the millet, and creating the demand for higher quality millet. So the problem with millet now is it's a subsistence crop. There's no farmer that's saying, like, I want to make a lot of money selling millet, because he knows no one's really buying it. So it's a subsistence crop, so people grow it in the back of their house, and then when it's ready, there's no real equipment to process it. So they thrash it on the ground, and when they collect it, that's how you get all the stones in it. And so the farmer's not going to actually want to process it better unless they know that there's a market that's willing to pay, well, who wants it, one, and two, is willing to pay a higher price. So the question to us is, as people on the food side, how can we use it, and how can we start to assure them a way that they can make money and encourage them to process it better? And then on the ag side is, how can we come up with simple solutions, whether it's going to be almost like a cooperative way of having equipment that moves from one location to the other. That could allow us to do it at a subsistence level and make it interesting until such time that there's bigger consumers. We need, for the revolution to really take off, you need major consumers to take it first. So if we can get beer, because beer is always, like, in every country I've ever been to, no matter what situation the country is in, there's a functioning beer factory, right? So for me, it's like, how do we get beer to use more and more millet or other, like, traditional grain content? How do we get the prison system to start providing more millet? How do we get hospitals? How do we get the school children to eat more millet? How do we once we get them, you've got the numbers, which means farmers will be excited. How do we come up with more recipes? If you think about it today, how many recipes do you guys know that uses millet? We now have pito, right? And then the cocoa, the porridge, the breakfast porridge. We have tozafi.
And then we have zinkun, the other drink I brought.
Okay, so there's another, okay. Now, what do all those four things have in common about millet? All of them are using millet in a ground form. So because we have the stone issue, most people find, I don't know which is chicken or egg, right? So all of them are versions where the millet is ground. As my cousin said, she's like, when you grind the stones, they don't kill you, you know? So all of them are like, first you grind it so that the stones are not your issue, and then you process them into something. But as you can see, the millet is actually really beautiful, and it could be used in a form that is whole grain. And that's how I use it in the salad, and that's how I had my problem. I would love for it to also just be a conversation with you, because as I said, it's better for the environment, and we know we're gonna have more erratic rainfall. We know that there's going to be warmer climates. We know that actually for a farmer, it's cheaper to grow something that doesn't require a lot of inputs, because they're not worrying about all these other things. So one is the farmer side and the producer side, but also you can't actually find it in any grocery store. So if you want to, I go to Nima to get my millet. So it becomes a food product that has been delegated to a place that does not allow certain types of people to buy it. It's like it's not even considered or thought of for certain types of people, because once you take it out of the grocery system, you mean middle class people are not supposed to buy it. It's only something you actually eat when you're in the lower levels of class. So we need to declass it as well. We need to come up with delicious new recipes, whether it's using it in the ground form or it's in its whole form. I think unless we as chefs and cooks and caterers and consumers, both professionally and domestically, start thinking about using it and sharing it, other people won't know. So I just think it's something that is undervalued, and it's interesting because people are starting to value it outside of Africa. So my mother grew up in Tamale, so we were laughing that now she has to go to Whole Foods in New York to buy like really nice millet when she was like eating it all the time in Tamale when she was growing up. So as over the last few years, I've been trying to figure out what's happened in like our forgotten crops. They're not forgotten crops. We start the story with people eating and consuming them. Then you add in colonialism, you add in cash crops. So that actually forced us to destroy our agricultural systems. So cocoa is a perfect example, because someone has forced you to grow something that you don't even consume or use so that you can sell it, to become dependent on an international system, because if you grow your own food, you're independent. So we have to make sure you don't grow your own food and you grow what we want. So we buy into the system. Our contributions are cocoa and pineapples and mangoes and I don't know, whatever, right? So that's what we throw into the system. We get back foreign exchange, and then we buy our food. So I think I can look up the number, but the amount of money that we spend as a continent to import food is equal to the amount of money it would cost us to solve the entire power problems in the entire continent. So the idea and the fact that we're dependent to buy our own food is actually a huge problem to our development period. So cocoa for me, I mean, I do make chocolate, but the reason about why I make chocolate is for a couple of different reasons. One is, why should someone eat chocolate that's using our cocoa without us adding the value add here? And that's why I make my chocolate in Ghana. Yes, we might want to consume more cocoa, but cocoa needs to not only be chocolate. So there's a lot of different ways that we can process cocoa. Whether it is, for example, like when I started, my dream was to make my packaging from the cocoa pods, and turn that into a paper. You can't find it, because in Ghana we process the pods for soap. So when we talk about agriculture, especially at a community level, most communities know how to use everything that comes from that plant. Exactly. So everything gets used. I mean, you were talking about the stem from the okra. Like we're using it at the community level. When we transplant it into an urban setting is where we have quote unquote waste. So the cocoa pod is being used for something. Now there are people that are turning the pulp that's coming off the ferment into a juice. There's the beans, or so like even the husk, not the husk. So the cocoa pod has the cocoa bean has like a small shell around it. So when you roast it, that comes off, and then the inside is like what turns into the nibs, which goes into the other process. That shell is also being used for teas. It's being used for, like, some people are using for potpourri. There's like the butter is not just for cosmetics. There's a lot of other uses for that butter that comes out. So if we as Ghanaians are to consume more of that, then we can state the price and say, actually, we don't need your price because it has more value inside. Example being Kenya, where they started drinking coffee later. Before, they were shipping the beans out, but now when you see Java House, you see like all these places cropping up, and Kenyans are consuming more coffee. So it's like, if you don't want to take the coffee beans, we're okay because we're consuming it locally. So if you want to consume it, you might want to pay a higher price. So all of a sudden it creates a new economy. But we need to think about it in a few different ways. Number one, how much of our land is being used for cash crops and how much of it is used for food that we're going to consume. And then the ones that are being used for cash crops, like, do we want to do that and how do we add more value to it? Because if we're talking about the fonio, for example, there's probably more fonio being shipped out of Ghana than there is being consumed in Ghana.
Yeah.
So, and then when you ask yourself, okay, how do we get more Ghanaians to eat fonio? Because fonio is even more exciting in some ways because, I mean, it's harder to process, but it's also interesting because if you want to cook millet, you need more water, you need more fuel to boil the millet to be soft. If you're doing fonio, as soon as the water boils, you drop it in and 3 minutes later it's ready. So all of a sudden, if you're like a lower income family, you're dropping your gas consumption. Think about how much time and energy you're spending doing like the banku and all that stuff. So you gotta like actually look and think about the major difference that could make for a family is just like expenses. But I think that we need to, it's almost like a national conversation, like, do we want to start feeding ourselves? I was very shocked and surprised when I started having conversations with people because there's nothing that I'm saying that's new. In my family, I left in 81, and in 83 was the quote-unquote lean years in Ghana. And it was not lean years because only of drought, it was lean years because of the coup d'etat and the blockage that the international community had put on Ghana. So we were not getting Forex, so people could not import food. So we became really creative with local ingredients. Fast forward to, now, and I was like, oh, we need to be careful because one day, and I'm like, oh wait, it's already happened. And we actually didn't learn our lesson. And it's been interesting hearing the conversations about COVID. People are planting more in their houses, but are they really gonna keep that up? And what does it take? Because I've started my own garden. I'm learning a lot. It's very humbling, but it's also very, very fulfilling because when I see like things coming out of the soil, or like I'm making dinner using the alefu that grew in my own garden with no chemicals, fine. But the day that like all the white flies and those pests like attacked my leaves, I was just like, and so you realize that we need to relearn a lot of things, or at least talk to each other and share that knowledge that's kind of lost. I can't give you a straight answer, but I'll tell you what I think. Because it is a subsistence crop, what are people giving money to right now, right? So we've got people bringing in inputs into this country, we've got people bringing in seeds, we've got people bringing in pesticides. Those are all subsidized. We've got people bringing in imported rice, which is cheaper than anything that you will find of the local rice. So even if you're a good nationalist, even if you're a nationalist and you want to do made in Ghana, if you see the local brown rice and the imported white rice is much cheaper, you're going to make a decision based on how you're going to feed your family. So I would say that the things that are coming in the market and the way that they show up is it's cheaper, it is easier. There are no incentives for these traditional crops, and there are incentives for the corn lobbies, et cetera, et cetera. So if you go to the north, there are some fields that people were kind of doing some subsistence farming of millet, and then someone comes and says, hey, there's a subsidy and we're doing corn, right? Because they're trying to grow corn, actually not even for kenkey and stuff, but they're growing the corn for the poultry. So we're using the land that was being used for millet for us to eat, to grow corn to feed the chickens, so that we can bring the price of chicken down so that those who have enough money to actually have a meat-focused diet can have cheaper poultry. Now, I understand there is a challenge because the poultry farmers in Ghana are also being decimated because the imported chicken is half the price of the local chicken. So I understand why you would want to bring that price down, but then when you put it into a whole system, I haven't experienced it yet, but I was talking to somebody who said that you have to be careful now in Tamale because the 4 o'clock cocoa is not always available. It runs out because a lot of these farms that were used for subsistence millet are switching over. So they're not even getting the millet that they were used to have the cocoa stands in Tamale. So you can start to see the impact of the lobbying. And it, you know, I think that we need to start thinking more about really what do we want to do as a country? How do we want to feed ourselves as a country? How do we, and when I was talking to the person, I think it was from Diageo, about using millet. And he said, yes, I agree with you, but it's actually more expensive for me to use millet than to bring in the wheat from outside. So it's not that he's not thinking about it and he's just being callous, but like they actually are thinking about it, but they can't, as a business, can't figure out financially how to make it work. So there's a lot of people I think we need to bring into the conversation. But fundamentally, I think that there are a lot of us here that are tastemakers that like really can influence people to start asking questions or trying some of these recipes. Or adding new recipes to what we're talking about. But I think there are major systemic issues that go far beyond sort of us that we also need to find a way to, what is it they say? It's a quote from the Dalai Lama about mosquitoes. Like, you want to be that mosquito, like in that room when someone's trying to sleep, right? So I think that we can still make an impact because we all know that like when you've had that mosquito in your room at night, it definitely woke you up and you paid attention to it. So I think in many ways, as we move forward, like in terms of the Ghana food movement, how are we going to start being that little mosquito in the room to start asking these questions? Because I think it goes, and the food that I cook, I always say it's culture, community, and cuisine intersecting with environment, sustainability, and economy. And when I look at millet, it answers a lot of those questions because the economy could be hugely impacted if we start keeping some of that $1.6 billion in Ghana. I think about the environment. We're choosing a crop that actually works with the soil going into climate change and everything. In terms of sustainability, the same thing stands true for that. And we do have a culture. I mean, we just came from this amazing festival where it's about millet, but actually millet has been lost in the story. So how do we put the millet back into that culture and that conversation? Because all the food we saw that were in the streets today was actually not millet. Yeah. No, but I mean, if somebody is telling you, look, grow this corn, I'm giving you the seeds for free. I'm going to even give you a discount on fertilizer. Will you not grow it? So it's about incentives, right? But I was talking to, the guy was in his mid to late 20s. A young guy had finished university and went into farming, which is like unusual because people were like, oh, he went to school, oh, but he still wants to be a farmer. So he was growing corn, and I said to him, you know, how's it going? He said, look, none of the extension workers will tell you this, but I always grow beans after, because he knows that the beans are going to fix the soil after. And he also understands that the land is his, and he's 20 years old, so he knows that this is his land for the next 40 years. Now, if you go to most farmers in Ghana, how old is the average Ghanaian farmer? 50s, okay? And their child is trying to come to Accra. So he's looking at that soil, let me use the fertilizer and get the next 5 years from this soil. He's not thinking I'm going to give it to my son or my daughter and they're going to take it forward. Because if that was the perspective they had on farming, then the soil health would be the most important conversation. And I think that's where it comes from. But I do agree. When I say millet, it's about choosing one thing that we could create something from. And once that becomes a conversation and it's moving forward, it needs to be something else. I believe in diversity. But I think we need to respect. And like one of the things that I always talk about is we need to know where we are and what grows here and what has grown here before. So once you know what grows here, you need to respect that, because that's what takes the least energy, right? So if the northern regions are able to grow millet, and I also think that there are other forces that have kept the northern communities in a certain level of challenges, why not give them the advantage to do millet, and we support them. There's also, I forget this area, it's about 1 hour from Tamale, where it's a natural rice valley. There is no irrigation. The rice grows there just like that. That is our rice growing area. So let's grow the rice. It doesn't have to be jasmine rice, because jasmine rice requires a certain amount of water that we don't have. So let's respect ourselves, you know? And for me, it's like every region in Ghana has something. I think it's sad that my 9-year-old niece knows more about strawberries that are coming from Europe than she knows about the purple bananas, plantain that grows in the western region. The infrastructure is part of it, but we have to decide, like, who are we and what are we about, and how are we going to make sure we value ourselves, because nobody's going to value us unless we give ourselves that value. And I think that, yes, millet is one. The tubers are also there, you know, and I also love like things like plantain, because you actually don't have to. This goes back to this is like a little very technical, but as we talk about climate change, you want things where the roots continue to go deep into the ground and clean the air for us, okay? So as we talk about anything that requires tillage and that needs to be replanted every year, you're cutting the roots. And then like anything that is a tree, where the roots continue to go down, are really good for us. So that's why I tend to go for plantain, coconut, the jackfruit, all these ones that actually the tree just keeps going, right? So it's quite good to think about choosing things that are good for the soil. But and again, you have to mix it, right? Even when you go to the cocoa farm, like, let's encourage cocoa farmers to do more. Like, it's not about just, I mean, they do it already traditionally. They have the cassava, right? So they have cocoa yam. Yeah, so they're eating their condombre, they're eating, you know, like everything is there. So it's a question, for example, even like you were talking about the cocoa. Right now we're in a moment where we need to make a decision about cocoa, because climate is changing. The trees we have are not going to work with the climate change. So it means the yields Ghana is going to have is going to go down. So we're trying to encourage them to plant the type of trees that will do better. But when you're 55 years old and someone tells you to plant a new tree, are you going to do it? Because you're not going to see that tree. And your son is already going to Accra. So finish. But those are the things for me. And that's why I think when I cook my food, I'm just like, how do we just find new ways to bring these ingredients back? No, absolutely. I think, but again, it's like you have to balance the lobbying again. But I mean, I met some guys a couple of years ago. They are with the Land Institute. I don't know if you're familiar with them. And they have a variety of millet that is perennial. So it means that you plant it and you never have to plant it again. It will just keep shooting up, right?
Where do they grow it in Ghana?
They're not doing it. They actually wanted to talk to me about it. And I said, okay, do you have perennial rice? Because Ghanaians will eat the rice first. Because I mean, when it comes to, like, we have to also be aware of behavior change. I can't expect you to go from white rice today to eating, you know, like, think about even us as a group, no judgment, but how many of us tried the fermented millet one at lunch today? Like, yeah, there was a lot left behind. Yeah, that's all I'm saying. But I'm just saying it takes time for people to change their behavior and their palates, right? We also need to be aware that it takes time for people to change how they eat, and you need to kind of think about a gradual process of change. if it's going to be at a national level. Like if it's even if, like think about it, how many of us made like a resolution to eat better at the beginning of the year, or you know what I mean? Like you slide back a little bit. Millet and fonio are much better. I need to check sorghum. I'm not 100% sure, but they are. Thank you for bringing that up, because one thing I noticed is in Ghana, that is actually a bigger motivator than environment. Like most people, no offense, but most people are just like, I don't have time to worry about what's going to happen in 30 years. Like, I'm worried about my family and my health now. So I think that actually you're absolutely right. That I think number one, for people on the food side, it's like deliciousness. Just make it delicious. I think two is the health implications, that what's going to sway more people. The one thing I don't have personally the capacity to do, but I think would be a huge thing, is the financial. So actually, if we could make sure that people see that it's actually cheaper, or it's not as, like, I'm not saying it is, but I'm saying what we need to look at the financial side of it, because I think health, taste is probably subjective, but I think the health and the financial implications of food choices is probably the biggest, yeah. I've seen millet kenke. Someone who's had that. Yeah, yeah. I think that the thing that's going to tip to allow this to happen needs to be, it actually needs to be a national campaign. It needs to be a national campaign that the government says we are behind it, and we will commit government procurement to it so that we can get it into all these institutions. And that will actually say that, like, in the next, let's say, 3 years, we've decided that this is where we're going to be. So we're going to actually support all of this infrastructure to be built to move the product through. And it's like, the other thing I keep saying to myself is that, what are we doing with the products in terms of agro-processing? Like, I know that there's, I think one of the institutions, I don't know if it was Craig or somewhere, but they were working on trying to develop a millet-based bread, because you know we love our sugar bread. So the question is, how can we replace some of those things with something that's going to be a little bit more nutritious? So if you've got like kind of those big projects where you're actually coming up with significant consumption, like things are just going to move. No, but that's why, like, for me, it's been like the millet project needs to happen, you know, and I see it as like step one is like, what are the bottlenecks and the challenges for moving it forward on both consumer and producer, and then identifying who are all the partners that we're going to work with. Step two is like actually getting the institutions to sign up to understand what kind of recipes they're going to be doing, and then we've got the producers and the infrastructure being built to support that, and then phase three is like you actually activate. So like phase two is where you're like talking to the nutritionists, you're talking to the people that are doing the catering for the school programs, so that they're starting to get ready, they're starting to understand what this means, getting bloggers to get excited about it and all that. So that's phase two. So when everyone moves into like activation mode, it's like there's something ready to go. I would say it's not so much millet. I would say it's fonio that probably fits into that category, because everybody, like, millet is grown throughout the continent, like most of the continent. So the one, I think the fonio is right now the super cool. Everybody wants to get their hands on fonio. And that's the one where there are like, for example, I lived in Senegal for 6 years. I never ate fonio once, like ever. and it was never like offered to me anywhere in Dakar. So I know that it was for the lower income communities, and that's how it plays itself out. It's the same thing here. Very few like Ghanaians know anything about fonio, because it's, you know, we don't have it as plentiful as like Mali, but we do have it, and it's something that, you know, it goes, a part of it is part of our colonial kind of like, we're taught to not value what is from here or from somewhere else looks better, but you know, it's from here, and how do we also balance, and this is a very good question I don't have the answer to, how do we balance, so for example, if a fonio farmer has been approached by someone to export X tons of it at this price, right, the guy's going to be excited, right? So what happens is the fonio's leaving, going straight to Tema, and I'm looking for fonio for my recipes, and I can't find it, but then it doesn't have all the behavior change and the consumption levels here. So of course he's going to want to take what he can do to feed his family now, and to send his kids to college and blah, blah, blah. And he's not thinking about here, but somebody needs to think about, how do we make sure we do have enough here that we can consume it, since we already know it's super nutritious, right? And that's where it gets to geographic identification. I mean, I don't know how many of you guys are familiar with teff. I had some, but I didn't want to bring it because I know we were focused on Ghana today. But teff it looks like fonio, but it's even smaller than fonio, right? And they have a white one and a brown one. And with teff, the world kind of heard about it about, I don't know how many years ago now, but when the world started, like after quinoa, the world was like, we're looking for the next quinoa. And so I think teff kind of came up as a superfood, right? So what happens with that is the government of Ethiopia says, we have our own food security issues, so we're not going to export any teff. But what we're going to do is we're going to open new fields, like new land, and we're giving out like those lands and certifying that those are just for export, so that we do not have a negative impact on our local food nutrition needs, right? So those new lands are opened up, and in the 5 to 7 years it takes the farmers and the companies that have, like, you know, gotten the commissions for that area. I think South Africa and India started growing teff, and now they've lost that sort of space. But with geographic identification, I don't know, okay, so my first degree is in geography, so there's something called geographic identification, which is a way of saying that this thing is from this land, and because it's from here, and we have the know-how and the knowledge, and or because it's indigenous to here, we have a certain label. So for example, champagne, even if you use grapes and you do the exact same process, if it's not from that region of France, you can't call it champagne. Cachaca, which is like our version, well, it's like, cachaca is like aquateshi. It's made from sugarcane, it's from Brazil. Cachaca is also a geographic identification, so you can't call anything else that. So you create something that is uniquely yours, you apply to the world bodies, and you have something so that no one can copy you, right? It's almost like putting a copyright on either a process. I know, for example, in the Volta region, there's a certain type of palm oil that is like zomi, but it's even pressed with the feet, right? So why not get a geographical identification for that and put it in the beautiful bottles that they have for olive oil? Why not? Because the thing is, I know, like, especially in this day and age in Ghana, there's a lot, and everywhere in the world, there's a lot of fake food. Right, so like I think a few years ago there was people were using chemicals to dry salt instead of dry fish instead of salt. Like, I think that we should get to a place where we respect our traditional practices, and the people who have kept these things alive generation after generation after generation should be able to get to a place where they say, my grandfather, great-grandfather has been teaching us in my village how to do this, and we now have a certification that says it's from this region. And that's how you add value. So like this version of zomi, if you had boiled yam and you drizzle a nice little amount of the palm oil, it will be delicious, right? So I think that we need to get to, but I mean, like in Ghana, we're eating for volume, right? We're not eating for quality. No one's like, oh, that palm oil was different than the other one. No, now we're just like eating. So I think, I mean, but for me, when I look at a place like Italy, Italy is amazing to me because they have regional, like this cheese comes from this region, and like I want to be able to do that here in Ghana. You know, I want us to start to get to a place where people know that, I don't know, even the Navrongo tomatoes. I want to know they're Navrongo tomatoes. You know, we should start to understand the value of these things and respect them, and then be able to pay a little bit more and to show that we care. I know not everyone can pay more, but those who can should, which actually starts to put money back into the system for those who are actually doing these things. The same thing with the fabrics, like kente and all these cloths. Like, if you actually wanted to make an outfit with that, you're wearing money, right? But if we keep buying Itargé, high target. I like to give a nice little French accent, Itargé. But high target from China, you understand that the money is leaving Ghana, number one. Number two, you know that you wash it 2 times with Omo, finish, right? The cloth, the color is gone. But there is a need to also preserve the culture of weaving. So there needs to be something done to protect that, whether it's government subsidies or some kind of UNESCO, like Senegal just applied to UNESCO to get Cebuchen put on the list of like, you know, culinary heritage stuff. Yep. You know, we have stuff here too. You know, we just need to figure it out and name it. I think that there's a lot that we have, and I think the future is really bright. And I think we just need to kind of organize ourselves a little bit better. And honestly, like trips like today, it just shows you, you know, the amazing value that we have in this country, that we just need to kind of shift the narrative a little bit. So yeah, thank you. Thank you.